Welcome to Biology Module 16. You've made it to the last module in the biology textbook. Yay! As usual, if you have any questions, you can send them to me at mrc@mrcscience.com. So we've slowly worked our way from microbes all the way up to animals and plants. And so we've been walking our way slowly through, and now the last module whips through the last little bit. Covering reptiles, birds, and mammals. So different classifications here. So let's talk about the first one, class Reptilia. Class Reptilia is our common reptiles, turtles, snakes, lizards, alligators, crocodiles, all that kind of stuff. Dinosaurs fit into here, at least most dinosaurs fit into here, not all of them. Okay, so what makes a reptile? Scales. Dry, tough scales. So a reptile's ectothermic. What does that mean? It means that it cannot regulate its own body heat. It does not produce its own body heat, so it relies on the outside. Once it heats up, those scales help to insulate it a little bit to keep it from heating up too fast or cooling down too slow. Okay? They have lungs. Not everything we've looked at up to this point has had lungs, so they breathe through lungs. Heart. The heart changes in all kinds of different ways as we move through our classes of our animals. So this has a 3-chamber heart. That means 2 atrium and 1 ventricle. So, yep, 1 ventricle in the middle, 2 atriums on the outside. Comes from the body, pumps into there, goes out to the lungs, also goes back to the body, comes back from the lungs, oh sorry, not from the ventricle, comes back from the lungs, pumps back into here, goes back to the lungs, goes back to the body. There is mixing occurs inside the central vacuole. It is partially divided, so there's a little bit of a division there, but not complete. Okay. Produce amniotic eggs with leathery shell and oviparous. So amniotic eggs, that means it's got the amnion and it feeds the eggs in there. Leathery, so not the hard shells like the birds. And most oviparous. What does oviparous mean again? Let me finish drawing here. Most oviparous means that the eggs are laid outside of the body, if I remember correctly. Eggs. Okay. So go ahead, you should have your books handy. Turn to page 496. In there you'll see a picture of an amniotic egg. One of the reasons they call it an amniotic egg is it has an amnion. Basically with amniotic fluid. So the embryo sits in the amnion, the bag with the amniotic fluid. Attached to it is a yolk sac, which feeds the young. And then we have an allantois, which is a sac of blood vessels that allow respiration and excretion from the embryo. So a way to get rid of waste as well. Then around that we have the chorion. A membrane that envelops all the structures that were just described, and all that floats within albumin. That's what you would think of as when you think of the white part of the egg if you break a chicken egg. It's there to protect the embryo as well as being antibacterial. So they can help with reduce the growth of pathogens that can get into the cell. So pretty straightforward. So basically everything it needs to get going there. It's got a shock absorber, it's got protection, it's got food, it's got a place for waste and respiration. So it's all set to grow until it breaks out of the egg. On page 498 are some pictures of different classes of the or different reptiles. So you've got your squamata, which we'll talk about. They're all squamata. No, there's some testudines, the tortoises and the turtles at the bottom, and the crocodilia, the crocodile and the alligators. So So we're going to go through, we got our class of reptilia. So we're going to go through some of the orders. Remember, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So first order they talk about is one you really don't hear much about at all. It's the order of, let me see if I can spell this, Rhynchocephalia. Yeah, glad we don't have to say that in order to pass. Many extinct reptiles, including dinosaurs. So many dinosaurs are in here. So a lot of different dinosaurs says contains one living reptile called a twatura. Twatera. Which means spine bearer. So grows up to about 30 inches long. Nocturnal, has spines, a lifespan about 40 to 60 years. Okay. Interesting thing about the twatura is it's got a third eye on the top of its head, although you really can't see it because it's underneath the scales, but the scientists believe that it's used for sensing light. Few of them live in small islands near New Zealand, so we don't really talk about that much unless you consider the dinosaurs themselves. Okay, next order is Squamata. Is our next order. Squamata are snakes and lizards. So, Squamata, besides having these scales, ectothermic, lungs, three-chamber heart, and amniotic fluids, there are some things that set the order Squamata apart from the other orders. 2 pairs of limbs. Now you're going to say, wait a second, what about snakes? Okay, and except snakes. Snakes obviously don't have any limbs. Okay, so 2 pairs of limbs, have ears, can hear. Guess what? Except snakes, they can't hear. Makes you wonder why they're in Squamata, but they break off after the order family. They'll break off in the family area down there. So, okay. Lizards have the same type of scales all over the bodies, while snakes have specialized scales on their bellies for locomotion. So kind of interesting. Most things have the same regular scales. Lizards on the bottom, snakes, if you ever held a snake, you feel along the bottom their scales are set up like this. And what happens is it can slide easily that way, so as it's moving, as the snake moves, it slides, but when it pushes, it opens up those scales a little bit, and they kind of grab and help it push along the ground. So, okay. Most lizards have eyelids and therefore can close their eyes. Snakes' eyelids are always open. Okay. So eyelids, except for snakes again. So it makes you wonder why this is here, but this is all the Squamata other than snakes. Okay, lizards. Lizards fall into here. Everyone's fairly familiar with what a lizard is. In many 1960s and 70s horror movies, examples, Komodo dragon, gecko, chameleon, horned toad, things like that. Okay, snakes. Snakes have a couple interesting features here. First of all, they had something called a Jacobson organ. Son's organ. And basically what that is, you ever notice a snake sitting there and its tongue keeps flipping out and back. What it's doing is it's waving its tongue in the air. Chemicals in the air are sticking to the tongue, then it's taken inside and inserting that tongue into its Jacobson organ, which allows it to augment its sense of smell. Snakes can tell a lot by a sense of smell. Okay, many snakes are poisonous. Not all of them, but many snakes are poisonous. They talk about a couple different types of poison here. They talk about neurotoxins, and they talk about hemotoxins. Okay, now neuro should sound familiar. Neuron attacks the nervous system, causing blindness, paralysis, and suffocation. If you paralyze the lungs, they can't breathe, it dies. Hemotoxins. Hemo should sound familiar. We use it in hemoglobin. Poison attacks the red blood cells, which contain hemoglobin, and destroying circulation. So if you destroy those blood cells, they can't carry oxygen anymore, and effectively they suffocate again. So a couple different kinds of toxins there. They'll talk about a bunch of different types of snakes. Go ahead and read through those. Okay, so that was order Squamata. So now let's move on to order Testudines. They're testudines. Okay, these are the turtles and tortoises. What's the difference between a turtle and a tortoise? Turtles can go into the water. They are, what's the word I'm looking for? Amphibious. They are not amphibians, but they are amphibious. Tortoises on the land, that's the main difference. Both have the thick shells that make them obvious to tell the difference. So, okay, so that's Testudines. Next order is Crocodilia. Crocodilia are obviously crocodiles. How do I spell crocodile? There we go. But also alligators. Talks about how to tell the two different apart. Here in Minnesota, we don't care a lot, but crocodiles have the thin snout. So if you look at them from above, their snout is thin. Alligators have the bigger snout, so big rounded snout. Crocodile, many of their teeth will stick out when they shut their mouth. Alligators, their teeth will all be inside when they shut their mouth. Let's see. So let's move on to the next. So they, among all those orders now scattered amongst them are things that we call dinosaurs. Now, many of you from an early age were interested in dinosaurs, different types of dinosaurs. Dinosaur means thunder lizard or terrible lizard, I don't remember. Maybe it says terrible lizard, yes. They were known because they were so large. They look at a few different types. If you turn to page 505, you see Apatosaurus. Apatosaurus are the brachiosaurs, what we used to call brontosauruses. Have the long neck, long tail. Interesting thing about apatosaurs is they tend to grow throughout their lifetime, so they can get extremely big. Stegosaurus, of course, plates on its back, spines on its tail. Triceratops, 3 horns on its head, thus the tri. Tyrannosaurus, that was the king of the dinosaurs, or the thunder lizard. So, Plesiosaur is water-based, and then Pteranodon, which is what we used to call pterodactyls, the flying reptiles. As you can see, they're all very different, and they can belong to different classes within the reptilia. So, okay, so that's kind of reptiles. Now let's get into birds. So that was class Reptilia. This is class Aves. Guess where we get our word aviation from? Aves. So, okay, a few things that are common amongst all birds. They are endothermic. Remember, reptiles were ectothermic, meaning they couldn't control their body heat. Birds are endothermic. That means they generate their own body heat. Like we said, we talked about the heart. The heart has 4 chambers, just like ours. 2 atriums and 2 ventricles. The ventricle is completely divided, unlike the the reptiles. Has a toothless bill. Birds do not have teeth. Okay. Oviparous, again, laying the eggs outside the body, amniotic egg, but this time covered in a hard shell, often containing lime, so also known as calcium carbonate. Okay, feathers, that is a unique thing to birds, at least the type of feathers we're talking about. There's some talk about feathers in dinosaurs, but they weren't. We'll get into that more in detail. Skeletons of birds are very different. For those birds that fly, now they notice we don't say fly is on the list because not all birds fly. You can think of penguin, you can think of ostrich, things like that, emu. But in the ones that do fly, they're porous. I can't spell. And light. And we'll talk a little bit more about the characteristics on that. So, okay, so you know endotherm, they generate their own body heat. The bird's ability to fly, the feathers help with flight, although they also offer some insulating properties. So go ahead and turn your book to page 510, and here you've got a feather. This is a basic feather. What's interesting, if you've ever played with a feather before, you'll notice we got the vane, we got the rachis, we got the quill, which is all part of the shaft. So you got the shaft and you got the vane. If you ever noticed that you take a feather, you can pull apart pieces of the vane, but then you can kind of stick them back together again just by pulling them together. And what happens is they got little hooks and barbels, just like Velcro. Our Velcro, I don't know, but it could be designed after the bird's feathers. So what's kind of interesting is if something damages the feather, pulls it apart, the bird can preen and kind of work those feathers back together, back down. Preening will help do that. It also spreads oil over the feathers. They have a preening gland that they get the oil and they spread it over the feathers to help waterproof and keep the feathers moist. Two types of feathers. Down. Down is strictly insulation. No hooks and barbels to keep together. And then contour. Contour feathers have a reason. Guess why they call them contour feathers? Contour feathers hold a shape. Now, when man was inventing flight or working on flight, he looked very closely at birds. You know, it's an interesting thing about a bird's wing, if you look on it sideways, is it kind of looks like this. So what that did is as air went forward towards the wing, the air had to take a longer journey on the top than it did to get under the wing. And what happened is in order to take the journey, it had to stay with all the other air, so it had to go faster up here. Faster across the top. Now when wind speeds go fast, the pressure drops. So the faster it went above the top, the lower the pressure got up here, so the high pressure on the bottom pushes the wing into the air. This is called Bernoulli's principle, although God invented it long before Bernoulli and creating the wing. So contour feathers help keep that wing shape. They allow it to fly, and they're very light at the same time. So let's talk about the skeleton. Most birds have a porous light bones. Why is that? Well, you want to stay in the air. The lighter you are, the better chance you have of doing that. So you don't want a lot of weight. Try and get into the air. So all birds that fly have porous light bones. They must be lightweight, but they have to be strong at the same time. So there's an interesting problem. So porous bones means there are cavities in the bones. What's interesting is they find that these bones have thin strands that traverse these cavities. So thin strands cross them and serve as what we call struts to strengthen the bone, to allow it to be strong without all the excess minerals holding it down. So they have strands that strengthen their bones. Okay, I'll go ahead and turn to page 514. In here are classifications of different types of birds. Now the nice thing about this is you do not have to remember these classifications. This gives you an idea of how they kind of group them together. So some of the obvious ones, ostriches, obviously they look very unique and don't fly, so they kind of go together. Penguins look very unique, don't fly, they actually swim, so kind of interesting. And then they have different ways put together. Flamingos have their own unique little area because they're very unique animals, one of the few very pink ones. But But you can look in here, you can see how they classify the different birds. Okay, so now we've blown through birds, and you can take in college, you can take courses just on birds, just on reptiles, just on different things. One class I took in college was called Mammalogy. For our class, Mammalia. Class Mammalia, study of mammals. So what makes a mammal? So on page 318 or 518, sorry, there's a list for mammals. Again, all these lists you'll want to know what the classifications are. So mammals have hair. Hair covering the skin. You may say, well, why are people mammals? Because they don't have a lot of hair. But if you look closely, especially a hairy guy like me, most of their skin is covered in hair. So we have hair. Reproduction. Internal reproduction is a way to classify mammals. We do not lay eggs. We have internal fertilization. And we are viviparous. Or most of us are viviparous, meaning we give birth to live young. So we nourish our young with milk from mammary glands. This kind of really sets us apart. That's why we're called mammals, after that mammary glands, or vice versa. We have a 4-chambered heart. Okay. And we are endothermic. We produce our own body heat. Okay. Hair. Let's start with hair. Hair is kind of interesting. We just have pretty much one type of hair. What purpose does hair serve? Primarily insulation. It can be a little sensory too. Some of our sense of touch is tied to our hairs and feeling the contact with those hairs. For many mammals they have underhair. Which provides primarily insulation. And then they have guard hair. Guard hair, as the name implies, is also slightly insulating, but longer and serves to give it colors and a little protection. Kind of helps hold the hair together, provides a little bit of waterproofing, things like that. Okay, reproduction. There are two types of mammals, placental and non-placental. Let's talk about placental first. Placental mammals have what's called a placenta. It's inside of the mom's womb when the baby's developing is a vast conglomeration of blood vessels, and that placenta lines up with the uterine wall, and it passes liquids, nutrients, gases, things like that back and forth across that. But what's interesting about that is the mom and the baby's blood actually never mix at that point. So interesting thing, when you're born, then you don't have a bleeding problem, hopefully. It also protects the baby from getting things like, there's a question now with the COVID-19 things. If the mother gets COVID-19, will it affect the baby? Well, they're not sure if that virus will pass across the placental barrier. So there's a chance that that placenta would protect that. So the structure allows the embryo to be nourished with the mother's blood supply with actually physically mixing that blood supply. Placental animals, of course, us, any of your normal mammals like dogs, deers, bunnies, all kinds of stuff like that are placental. Non-placental are a little different. Non-placental animals don't have that placenta. Examples of that, one that jumps to mind is a kangaroo. The kangaroo is birthed and then it works its way up to the I'm not sure about that. Double check that. That'll be an interesting question. But cool. Okay, they talk a little bit about gestation, how long the baby takes to develop before it's born. What's kind of interesting is humans have one of the longest gestation periods, not the longest gestation period, but they're up there. And takes a while. So go ahead and turn to page 520. Here you'll see a list of different classifications of mammals. These are probably relatively familiar to you, and you can see why there are different things classified differently here. On page 521 are some pictures, and it gives the order that they belong to. We humans, I don't know if they have humans in there. I don't know. Primates, yep, under primates are humans. So, cool. They talk about some interesting things like the duck-billed platypus, which is kind of an odd combination, and not really sure. It's got hair, but it lays eggs. It's got a bill, although not a bill like you normally think with birds. So that one's kind of an interesting conglomeration of what's going on. Okay, so we've hit the end of this module, made it all the way through module 16. So go ahead and finish up your module, get your tests together, and get them to me as soon as you can. If you have any questions, again, contact me at mrc@mrcscience.com. Thank you.